recognize many faces, and many faces I do not. So my name is Scott Fingerson. Our family attended Grace for many years, but we currently lead a ministry in Fort Myers, a Messianic Synagogue. I'm a Messianic rabbi. The name of our congregation is Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue. The team that led worship this morning is our youth worship team, and so we're grateful to give them the experience of leading with you, and they're just a delight for me to play with, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do that. So essentially what I'm here to talk about is Israel this morning, and largely this came out of a trip that I took to Israel in January of this year. After the attack on October 7th by Hamas, when Hamas came in and killed some 1,400 people in Israel and took some 200 plus hostages, maybe close to 240 hostages into Gaza. After that, what was most shocking in that was the barbarity of that attack. We've had murders and things like this. We've had 9/11, we've had bombings, but the barbarism of that attack was truly unreal. It was incredibly shocking. In November, the world press and various news celebrities began to question whether the attacks took place at all, because this is the world we live in, it's in the propaganda of our world. And so people began to question whether or not Israel was actually attacked and whether this is all just a big conspiracy. Well, you see, when Hamas attacked Israel, they wore body cams, much like our police here in the States. So they could take the video footage from their attack back to Gaza and then broadcast it around the world and celebrate what they had done. So naturally, when some of these terrorists were interdicted and killed, the Israeli police and Secret Service and everything else managed to collect these cameras and began to go through this footage, which, if you're familiar with what happened on that day, was pretty heinous and was not for the public because of just the nature of it. And so what happened is when the world began to criticize Israel and cast aspersions on Israel and suggest that maybe this never happened, the Israeli government went through this footage and assembled video, and then select groups of people were invited to come see it, and I was part of a group that was able to see this unfiltered video. And there's human, and then there's animal. If a person gets attacked by a tiger, it's brutal and it's savage, but the animal is just an animal. It may be defensive, it may be assaultive, it may be looking for food. It's animalistic. What I saw was not animal and certainly not human. It was a level of demonic barbarity and savagery that has no other explanation. I won't go into the details. By now, perhaps most of you know. What I wanted to do is I wanted to go to Israel and serve. So what happened in Israel is after the attack by Hamas, Israel got organized, and people who lived close to Gaza began to relocate to safer places in the country. People were called up into the reserves, and so on and so forth. So what you had is a massive relocation and huge numbers of people called up into the reserves, probably close to 600 people, or 600,000 people were called up into the reserves. So what you have is these kind of scenarios where you've got a small business, and now one of your people is off in the reserves. And what happens is you call your cousin or your nephew and say, hey, I need your help. Can you help me with the business? And so he comes to live with you for a few months to help you with your business, but he leaves behind a void. And that business or that place of work that he left, somebody else is called in to help. And you've got mothers and fathers going off to war, and now you've got a single mom at home, or mothers going off to war, because in Israel, both men and women serve, even in combat. So now you've got children at home, and so grandparents are moving around. So the entire country is just reconfigured. People are just moving around in order to take care of each other and take care of these voids in society, such that there's now all this social dysfunction. You walk into their equivalent of a DMV and half the kiosks are empty and half the desks are empty. You can't get anything done. You go to pull a permit, there's nobody there to review your plans. You go to pay your tax bill, there's nobody there to take your check. And the whole country has just gotten kind of dysfunctional because of this war footing. So what happened is people in America began to want to go over there and try to fill those gaps to serve. And I wanted to do that from the earliest moments. when I heard about this. And so it took a little while to get it organized and worked out, and there were some dead ends. I was set up to go, and I had my tickets and everything, and the group I was set to go with canceled. And so I had to pivot, and I ended up with another group, and I went the third week in January for 10 days. The group that I was with was 34 people from 8 different countries around the world, from Scotland, UK, Switzerland, Germany, Singapore, Australia, Canada, United States. 34 people from all over the world. Just to let you know kind of the sensitivity over there. They've been attacked, and just like on 9/11, some of us knew somebody personally who was injured or lost their life on 9/11. Well, over there, the country is so internetworked, interconnected. This country is small, and so everybody kind of knows somebody over there. I'm on my flight to Israel, and I had a seatmate in the aisle next to me, and after a while, we began to talk and introduced ourselves, and she was very friendly. She was a student in Israel, and she was going back from the United States, going back to see if she could finish her studies. And after a couple hours of conversation, I asked her the painful question: do you or anybody in your family, do you have anybody in your family whom you lost on October 7th? And she said, well, I have a cousin. His name is Hirsch Goldberg Polin, and he was taken hostage on October 7th. And I've only been on the plane for a few hours, and I've already connected with somebody, immediately connected. Hirsch was at the music festival, which some of you are aware of. And at that music festival, Hamas came in and started killing people. And Hirsch and his buddy went into a shed, and they were hiding in the shed. And Hamas surrounded the shed, and they threw in a grenade. And Hirsch's friend picked up the grenade and threw it back. And they threw in another grenade, and Hirsch's friend did it again and again. But the third time, his friend lost the race and was killed with that grenade. And in that same grenade blast, Hirsch lost his wrist or arm, we're not sure. Hirsch was actually in the news this week because Hamas played a video of him as a proof of life video. So if you look on the news, you'll see a video of this young man. It didn't take long to connect with somebody who was immediately connected to what happened over there. We were in line at a coffee shop, about 10 of our group that was over there just in line just to get a cup of coffee one afternoon. And of course, we obviously stick out like sore thumbs because we're Americans or foreigners. And one person in line with us turns around and speaks to one of our group, a lady. And he says, where are you from? And she says, well, United States. And he says, why are you here? And she says, she starts to respond. And he says, why are you here? Don't you know there's a war on? Are you here for a tour? Are you here to be a tourist? You here to get souvenirs and take pictures? You here to see things? Why are you here? Don't you know this is inappropriate for you to be here? And she says, well, sir, you're absolutely right. It would be inappropriate for us to be here to be a tourist. We're not here to be tourists. We're here to serve. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, we're doing work in the country. Where are you working? Well, we worked in the agricultural fields, in the agricultural sector. Many of our people worked in irrigation and these kind of things. And we did this over here, and she began to describe some of the things we did. And he said, did you know there was a war on when you came? And she says, yes, sir, that's why we came. He says, that doesn't make sense. His line was, that's insufficient. It doesn't make sense to me. And she says, well, he says, why would you do that? If you know there's a war on, why would you come here now? And she says, well, we just love Israel and we love the people. And he turns to the person next and he says, they came and they knew there was a war on. And by this time, everybody's heard the conversation. And people were astounded that we would have the temerity to come during a war. For the most part, we were pretty safe. There were a couple moments when things were a little tense, but for the most part, we were safe. We had some very competent guides and security guards, security officers. So we were safe, but it's still, well, honestly, quite frankly, it'd be like doing work in certain parts of Chicago or certain parts of Miami or many cities in the United States. I remember one time I was with my daughters in Los Angeles, and it was just me and my 2 daughters in the car, and I took a wrong turn. and I was in the middle of Gangland, USA, and everybody was looking at me, and it was very tense. There's insecure places in the world. Yes, there are parts of Israel that are very insecure right now, very unstable. Incidentally, this young lady that I spoke to on the plane, talking about her cousin, she asked me why I was coming, and I told her, and she was again amazed and astounded at why we would do this, why we would come to serve. I'm going to go through and show you some pictures, but I'll finish my introduction with this. There's a concept in Judaism. It's said this way, lo ta'amod al dam recha, and it means don't be a bystander if you can save a life. Effectively, we could just say don't be a bystander if you can do something. On April 2010, Hugo Teilvax was a 31-year-old man who had come to the aid of a woman attacked on 144th Street in New York, on Jamaica, New York, at 5:40 a.m. In attempting to save her life, he chased the assailant, but he was stabbed and he collapsed onto the sidewalk. An hour and 20 minutes later, his dead body was accidentally found by firefighters who were responding to a different call, but they were lost. They reviewed by this time he had passed, they reviewed the surveillance video, and it was seen on the video that nearly 25 people indifferently walked past him. Some of the passersby paused to stare at him. Others leaned down to get a close look at his face. After the attack, a man came out of a nearby building and took a cell phone photo of the victim. Police said they received 4 911 calls around the time of the attack, reporting a woman screaming, but there were no other calls. In 1968, John Darley and Bibi Latane, social science scientists, coined the term bystander effect for such cases where onlookers do not come to the aid of a victim. In fact, they discovered that the more bystanders who witness an emergency, the less chance they will actually help. The question is this: are we willing to do something when we see our neighbors in trouble? In Leviticus 19, it says this: don't stand idly by when your neighbor's life is at stake. I am Adonai. All right, let's go ahead and go through the pictures if you don't mind, and I'll just scroll through these quickly just to give you a sense of some of the things I saw, and then I've got some comments. This is Jerusalem. You'll notice something if you've ever been to Jerusalem. This is a Western Wall where people pray. Behind that wall, of course, is the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim temple that they worship at, and of course that remains in Jerusalem, even though this area is controlled and governed by Israel. What you notice here is almost nobody's there. It's very empty. Next frame, please. Very empty. This is normally thronged with people there to pray and tourists. Next frame. Mark, did you ever get there? Did you see it? Yeah. Here's one of the streets. In fact, our group, Mark, was on that street. I don't know if you recognize it. We were right there. I took a picture because when we were there, you could hardly walk. It was that crowded, and that's how empty it was on that day. It was brutally cold and rainy the whole time we were there, but somehow we were able to get things done. The first day we were in a town called Ruchama. Ruchama is about 9 miles from Gaza. Next frame, number 5. It's an agricultural community. They are 9 miles from Gaza. So after the attack on October 7th, communities within 5 kilometers were required to evacuate. They relocated throughout the country. And if you do anything with agriculture, you know that this year's crop is next year's seed. And so they had to abandon some of their fields. And so Americans, including some of ourselves, came in just to work in the agricultural sector, just to volunteer our work. Next frame, another view. There's some irrigation systems that we were assembling. We assembled, I can't remember what the total number was. I think it might have been 3,000 irrigation systems. Next frame. All right, this is a little community called Ashkelon. Ashkelon is very close to Gaza along the coast. It is a Russian congregation, mostly Russian Jews who have made Aliyah, but who believe in Jesus, or Yeshua, as he would be called there. And this is their sanctuary. And our job, our group, there are 34 people, our job was to put on a fun day for the children. And the goal is to give the children a sense of joy, a sense of fun, some sort of disconnection from the stress and alarm. Next frame, please. We did face painting. Next frame. What you see when you're over there is when there's a loud noise, the kids flinch and duck. The PTSD is throughout all the children in that environment. And this is a little child with his blankie. Next frame. You can see all the children and some of the helpers. Next frame. There's a couple of children enjoying themselves. And next frame. We did barbecue and fed them as well on that day. Many of the families in this group were blue-collar workers in the industry and so on and so forth. Firm, the group that I was with, got approval for all these pictures, so you don't have to worry about that. Many of the children were living in bomb shelters in their homes in the months directly following the attack, because if you recall, there was the big attack on October 7th, but then hundreds and thousands of missiles continued to be fired, sometimes hundreds every day, from Gaza onto Israel. And so the neighboring communities were under assault from these rockets and from these missiles. It would be kind of like if, say, for example, Inglewood kind of declared war on Port Charlotte. And every single day, you've got missiles flying over. And every single day, you're hearing about so-and-so's house getting bombed and so-and-so's aunt or child getting injured or killed every day. That's the threat that they live under. That's the dynamic that they live under. Next frame. So following that kind of stint of work, we ended up in Tiberias, which is on the Sea of Galilee. And I have personally been able to hike and backpack in the high mountains of the Cascades, the Western Mountains. I've been in very lonely places and very rugged places. And so I know the peace of just snow falling on firs and the peace of being in the mountains, and the only thing you hear is the wind through the trees. And that is a kind of peace, but that is still not the kind of peace I feel when I'm on the Sea of Galilee. There is something supernatural about that place. It has a peace, just a transcendent peace that really, in its geography, seems to connect you to God. Next frame, please. This is looking across at the eastern or the western side of the Sea of Galilee. And then next frame. So the hills are all green there, even though it was January, because that's how the weather works there. I was astounded. I thought things would be dead because it was wintertime, but they're actually all green there in the Sea of Galilee. Above these hills would have been some of the places where Jesus walked and taught during his ministry in and around the Galilee. Next frame. Again, looking down on some of these green, verdant hills of Israel, looking down the valleys around the Sea of Galilee. And I think I've got one more in this section, perhaps. Next frame. This is a fellow named Moshe Gabbai. Moshe is a tour guide and a teacher and a writer. And you'll notice, if you can see it, he has his assault rifle on his shoulder because the soldiers always carry their rifles everywhere they go. They are considered on duty all the time, and he was actually part of the reserves. Next frame. All right, this is actually Tel Aviv. After some work in Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee, we went to Tel Aviv. This is actually a church, a African church, I think Sudanese, and this is graffiti that they have on it. This section of Tel Aviv is what you would call the inner city in our area and or in the United States. And this is actually just a graffiti that artists decided to put up. We actually painted over all the graffiti on this church and did a lot of work inside the church. Again, these churches became rallying points after the attack. Let's see. Okay. Next frame. This is the day after we were in Tel Aviv. This is the night sky over Tel Aviv, and those are rockets that are being sent over Israel. Israel has several layers of defense. Most popular is known as the Iron Dome, and it is a missile system that actually intercepts these rockets in midair and blows them out of the sky, and it's quite the technological marvel. We actually did a lot of the work to develop it back in the 90s, and Israel. Next frame. All right, this is a community called Ofakim. Ofakim is not directly adjacent to Gaza, but on October 7th, what happened is the Hamas would leapfrog communities and go to strategic areas. Ofakim is a center where it has the regional police and some of the regional, like the National Guard, what we would have here, like Home Guard. And so Hamas targeted Ofakim. And what they did on that day is they launched a huge salvo of missiles. And in these towns, if you don't have a bomb shelter in your house, they have bomb shelters throughout the town. Go ahead to next frame. Maybe you've got a couple, go one more. Okay, this is a bomb shelter that just exists on the street. It's a concrete bunker. It's a box. And when you get the air raid siren, you have about 30 to 45 seconds to either get to the bomb shelter inside your house or get to one of the bomb shelters here. Here's another view of the bomb shelter. So on that day, October 7, what Hamas did is they launched a huge salvo of rockets onto Ofakim, but at the same time, they sent in fighters. And so as the rockets are falling on Ofakim, they have Hamas fighters walking through the streets. And it was just mass chaos. People were being gunned down in the street. There were hundreds that were killed just in Ofakim alone. And then what would happen is people would be hiding in these bunkers, because that's where it's supposed to go, and Hamas walks in and sprays down the inside of the bunker and kills everybody inside the bunker who's trying to save their lives. Next frame. So there's a young lady named Osi, and she has a kitchen in her home, and she does ministry where she serves Israeli soldiers and these kind of things. On the table there to the right, next frame, you see this. That's the nose cone of a rocket that landed in her yard. And it was a dud. And so if it had gone off, it probably certainly would have destroyed her house and probably would have killed her. She was in Ofakim. You may have heard this story in the news. Hamas fighters came in to a house, and there was a woman there, and she recognized them, and she knew what was about to happen. And she said, come in, sit down. Surely you're hungry. Would you like some tea? I'm just about to make some cookies. Sit down. You sit here and you sit here. And she had 5 Hamas terrorists in her home, and she had them sit at the kitchen table, and she said, are you hungry? Would you like something to eat? And she made them food. And then she made them tea. And then she made them coffee. And then she said, you know what, the couch is much more comfortable. You go sit on the couch. I'll bring you some water. You go sit on the couch. And for something like 10 hours, she sat there entertaining these Hamas fighters in her home. And somehow she was able to she was able to see her son, who was outside kind of trying to peer in the window and see what was going on. And she indicated 5, and she pointed, so I've got 5 people in here. And she said in a loud voice, you 3 sit in the living room. There's nice chairs there. And you 2 sit in the kitchen. I'm going to go into the pantry, she says in a loud voice so her son can hear. And so the police finally got organized, and they stormed the house, and they killed the terrorists. And they come out, and they said to the woman, we got them all, ma'am. You're okay. And she said, how many did you get? And she says, and the guy says, we got them all. It's okay. Everything's fine. She said, how many? He says, we got all 4 of them. She says, no, there's 5. And so she went back into the house. They went back into the house, started searching through the house, found him hiding in a closet. This is the level of invasion, right? This is your home. This is where you live. And this is what was happening in Ofakim. Next frame. This is the actual house where that lady lived, where Hamas was with her for a while. Her husband passed after this event, probably from the stress of it. Next frame. So near Ofakim, about 5 kilometers from Gaza, there was a major junction, major thoroughfare, a couple of major roads coming together. And this major intersection was called Gilat Junction. And all the traffic going into Gaza at that time was going through this junction. And as the traffic was going through about a week after the war started, 4 guys got together and said, you know what let's go down there and let's make hamburgers. We're going to cook hamburgers. We'll just give them away to the people in traffic. So they set up a grill, side of the road, and they started giving away hamburgers to everybody in traffic. And the traffic is everything from soldiers to support staff to police to fire to administrative personnel, etc. Lots of traffic, local police as well. And so somebody pulls up and says, "What are you doing?" And they say, "Well, we're cooking hamburgers and giving away." And he says, "Well, I'll be right back." And he went to the store and bought a big pallet or a tray of meat and buns and gives it to them. And so they cook those up, and that was that day. The next day, somebody else brings more meat. The next day, somebody else is bringing even more meat. And so somebody says, "Well, you know what we need? We need a cooler." And they donated one of those big outdoor coolers to store all this meat. And they're still cooking and giving away hamburgers. All of it donated. A couple days later, the mayor comes by and says, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "Well, we're cooking hamburgers and giving them away to soldiers and everybody going through here." And the mayor, of course, says, "Well, they can't do it here. This doesn't work because of traffic. So what we're going to do is we're going to bulldoze this field, and you can set up there, right next to the intersection." So they did. And somebody else came out and said, "Well, that's just going to get all muddy." So they laid down gravel, volunteer, donated. Somebody else said, "Well, that's not good enough. Let's go with asphalt." So they asphalted about 2 acres. Somebody else came along and said, "You know what you really need here? You need a tent." So they donated a 200 by 300 foot tent. This is all donated. In the meantime, people are donating every day. People are driving up with flats and crates of vegetables and hamburgers, and they're still just crunching out the hamburgers every single day. Somebody said, "You know what we need? We need a trailer that has like laundry facilities." So they brought in a trailer that has laundry. So now the soldiers can come in, get a hamburger, and do their laundry. Somebody else said, "You know what they need? They need hot showers." So they brought in a trailer that'll do hot showers. The rabbis got involved at this point and said, "Well, what we need to do is have a place where we can do prayers and read Torah and study together and minister to these soldiers." So the rabbis came in, brought their own tent, and now we have rabbis that are volunteering their time there 24/7. Soldiers can come in and say prayers and get that touch with the minister. Somebody else brought in a take and lend library, a bunch of paperbacks. So you got a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand paperbacks on the wall that you can take and have. Somebody else came in and brought in a bunch of counselors, therapists, massage therapists. Meanwhile, we're still doing hamburgers and coffee. And because this has become such a place now, the military got involved and said, "Well, this is now a target for the terrorists. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign this as a respite spot." And so now soldiers are assigned a certain time to go there, and the military took over security. I mean, it's still giving away hamburgers every day. And so that was what it's going to be. So now with the soldiers, when they get this respite call and they get assigned to go to this respite station, they call their friends and family. And they say, "Hey, can you bring the kids? I'm going to Gilat Junction. Can you and my wife, can mom and dad come and see me?" And so now it's become a family gathering place with free coffee and free hamburgers and so on and so forth. At their peak, they were giving away 25 to 35,000 hamburgers every single day. The military said, "We can't have all these soldiers coming in, so what we'll do is we'll send a truck and get all the hamburgers and truck them back into Gaza, so all the soldiers get hot hamburgers trucked into Gaza." So our group was tasked with running this entire aid station on a day. That was our job. So we had somebody doing trash, we had somebody doing laundry, we had somebody doing everything. And oh yeah, there's me. So it's an American institution, right? Men do grill, right? Except I don't do grill. I'm not a real man, apparently. I don't grill. It's not an art it's not my spiritual gift. How's that? So I promptly, when asked what we wanted to do, I promptly volunteered to grill because I figured, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to learn. And sure enough, you see the 4 grills in line, and all day long, you'll notice it's full. The minute a hamburger was done, another lady put a frozen one in its place. We did that for some 9 hours. We went through 2 pallets, 6-foot pallets of hamburgers. They calculated that we did over 8,000 hamburgers that afternoon. And that was our job. So now I know a little bit more about grilling. So that was our job, was to run that station that day. All of this is volunteered. Next frame. This is Emil. And I said the question to Emil that you say to everybody, "Did you lose any family members on October 7 or in the subsequent war?" And he said, "No, I didn't, but my daughter was supposed to go to the music festival that morning, and she has a late shift in Tel Aviv, and she got off work at 2 o'clock in the morning, went home to take a nap, and her friends texted her and called her, and she didn't hear the phone, and she overslept. And they went to the music festival without her. of those two friends that went, one was killed and one was taken hostage. And now she's dealing with the guilt, survivor's guilt. Emil said something to me that was really profound. He said, you can see he's obviously in his 60s or late 60s maybe. And he said, my friends and I used to sit around and talk about how this country was lost. We would call it the TikTok generation, the Facebook generation, the YouTube generation, the young people in our generation. Our nation is lost because of the young people. And he said, but you know what happened? Everybody stood up. The young people are running this. The young people are volunteering. The young people are serving. The young people stepped up to defend this country and save this country. And now I have hope. Next frame, please. This is Joseph Project. They're doing about 2 containers a month of distribution of food and goods. That's how much is going over there. Next frame. More of the Joseph Project. Next frame. There's us working at the Joseph Project. Next frame. There's me, proof of life. I was actually there. Next frame. All right. So the fellow on the left and the fellow on the right, these are very serious dudes. They're both in the Israel Special Forces. They both have served time in foreign service, doing protection for dignitaries. And the fellow in the middle is our bus driver. The fellow in the middle, our bus driver, is Arab, Palestinian. And he had a vision and had a dream of Jesus speaking to him. And he said, you need to come and find me. So he began a spiritual quest that resulted in him finding Jesus. The 2 security guards were also believers. He is now navigating with his wife, who's not a believer, how their life and how their marriage and how their kids are going to work. So we keep him in prayer. His name is Ashraf. Next frame. This is one of the people at the farms that I worked with. Next frame. And this is one of my friends in Jerusalem. He runs a little Orthodox shop there in Jerusalem. Next frame. This is the old city in Jerusalem near David's Tower, Citadel. Next frame. All right. This is a Seder table that is set for the hostages. And what it is we know that the hostages can't keep Seder this year. And there's a phrase that we say at the end of the Seder, at the end of the Passover meal, next year in Jerusalem. It means we all want to keep Passover next year in Jerusalem. It has added meaning to us who believe in Jesus, because when Jesus comes back, he's going to share the Passover meal with us. That's what he was talking about when he said, I won't take this cup until I take this cup in my kingdom. He was at his Passover meal. It was the cup of the Passover meal. And so he's saying, I won't take this cup until I take it in my kingdom, in the fullness of my kingdom, which is going to be set up in Jerusalem. And so next year in Jerusalem means we do it with Jesus, hopefully. But next year in Jerusalem might be the year that the hostages come back. So this is in anticipation and hope. Next frame. And back to the Sea of Galilee. So I talked about all these kids being relocated and moved around the country, all these families being relocated, moved around the country. In our hotel, there were children everywhere. Our hotel had basically the entire population of a kibbutz, Orthodox observant kibbutz, in our hotel. And so there were kids everywhere. They were doing their studies in the halls. They were zipping around in their scooters. The front steps were a gymnasium and a playground of the hotel. They had commandeered the elevators. Remember the kids in the elevators when we were in Israel? And you had to just be very patient because it was a little bit of a madhouse. So one of the things you saw everywhere is soldiers. And we saw them in the hotel. And I didn't really pay them much attention other than to note that they had their assault rifles and they were all fully kitted out. And they're all young. So last day I was there, I was in the lounge area getting a cup of coffee and just relaxing before my flight. And I struck up a conversation with 3 of these young ladies that served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And this young lady spoke to me and I said, well, where are you based? Where are you based? And she said, here. And I said, oh, Jerusalem. I thought maybe she was like Home Guard, National Guard, something like that. I said, Jerusalem. And she said, no, this hotel. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, my unit, my battalion is based here. This is our base. This is what we're assigned to. And I said, I was thinking National Guard, what do you do? Are you just defending Jerusalem? And she said that her unit is tasked with helping out the evacuees. That her people in her unit, her battalion, which was 200 people, is trained in education, primary education, triage, neonatal care, infant care, helping kids get daycare, counseling children. Anywhere there's a large group of children, the IDF has assigned soldiers there who are tasked with helping the children. They're not there just to be thugs and soldiers. They're there to interact with the kids. And so I look around, I'm like, oh yeah, there's one playing hopscotch, and there's one over there helping somebody with his math homework. This is what the military does. And every single one of them's got an assault rifle over their shoulder, fully kitted out. And it's like, oh, that's what they're doing. Excuse me. They actually train their soldiers. Remember what Emil said? It's the young people. They were all they might have been 20, 21 tops, and they're helping with these children that are obviously scarred by everything that had gone on. Remember the story I told you of the man who died on the sidewalk in New York, and nobody bothered to stop. So I'm walking with our group. There's about 10 of us or 15 of us walking through Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is just a very traffic city. There's buses, there's trains, there's cars, and there's pedestrians, and they all come through these intersections. And their intersections are interesting. They've got like multiple lanes. You got like a bus lane, then you got a train lane, then you got a car lane, and then you've got pedestrians working their way through it. So you end up with these multiple islands. Like you go to one island and you're waiting, and then you cross the next street, which is a passenger car, and then you cross the next street, which is a bus lane. And so that's what it is. So you got these multiple like pedestrian islands throughout the intersection. And I'm just watching, because that's what I do. I'm looking around just watching things. And I see this young lady coming, and she's obviously observant, Orthodox, because she's got the head covering and everything. And she's pushing a stroller, baby in the stroller, and she's got one little child next to the stroller on this side, another child next to the stroller on this side. And I'm just watching this like I'd be watching a play out, you know. And she pushes that stroller through the pedestrian island and comes up to the lane, and it's a bus lane. And she comes up to the edge, and she stops her stroller. And the child on this side stops, and the child on this side doesn't stop. And he's still walking. Meanwhile, and I'm watching this whole thing play out. I'm watching it happen. Meanwhile, this bus is coming here, and he's making good speed. He's got a green light. He's got the right of way. I don't know, but he's making good speed. The instant that child steps out and is visible beyond the stroller, because he was kind of hidden behind the stroller, the minute he steps out, that bus driver's laying on his horn. And I'm like watching this, and sure enough, he startles. Mom grabs him, gets him back, bus brakes, everything's okay. What was remarkable, though, is everybody around me turned and looked. Everybody saw it. Not just from the horn, everybody saw it happening. They are, I would say it this way, they are intuitively aware of each other. They're intuitively aware of what's going on in their communities. And when this child came in danger, everybody saw it happening, except, honestly, the people in my group. People in my group were a little distracted. And I said to one person, oh, wow, that almost happened. And they're like, what was that? What was that? Just missed it. Now, I was lucky enough. I'm not all that attentive, honestly. But I was lucky enough to see this play out. But what I saw that was more remarkable was not the salvation of this little boy, but that everybody was so instantly attuned. Next frame. Picture of the flag of Israel at night in the bridge. Next frame. And the flag over the Sea of Galilee again. Okay, I think that's it for pictures. Why does Israel matter to us today? Is there anything more than just a historical basis for our faith? Is it anything more than just a living museum with exhibits? The book of Romans provides a treatise written by Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, the foremost author, second to Moses in all the Bible, certainly the most influential author in the kingdom. A Jew, a Pharisee, a murderer, zealous to kill believers, which at that time were mostly Jews, yet later declares himself a slave of Jesus, a bondservant of the gospel. You are not your own. You've been bought with a price, says Paul in Titus, I believe. Romans chapter 1. You can turn there in your Bible if you like. We'll kind of bounce around Romans for a few minutes. I'll try to keep this, close up here in the next 15 minutes or so. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. What is this gospel to the Jew first? Many suggest that it's a reference to a time, an epoch. It's a historical reference. It came to the Jews first. While you could validate that through historical narrative, the problem is if you look through the rest of the book of Romans, it's obviously more than just a historical fact that Paul is alluding to here. And then when you get to Romans 9, you have a pivot in this discussion. He says this, I am telling the truth in Christ. I am not lying. My conscience testifies with me in the Holy Spirit. I have great sorrow and unceasing grief in my heart. Why? For I wish that myself were accursed, separated from Christ, for the sake of my countrymen. I wish that I could lose my salvation if it would mean that my countrymen could gain theirs. And look what he says. My countrymen, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom belongs the adoption as sons and daughters, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the temple service, and the promises, whose are the fathers, and from whom is the Messiah, Christ, according to the flesh, who is over all. Paul is willing to give up his own salvation for the sake of whom? Just so you're not confused, this is not spiritual Israel. This is the kinsmen of the flesh. These are the Jews. And then he goes into some of the defining characteristics of this Israel that he is so desperate to bring into salvation. He says that their characteristics are that they are adopted, they have the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the temple service, and the promises. Now, why would Paul mention these promises if indeed these promises have been irreparably broken? But rather, these promises were made with this people to whom Adonai God chose to reveal his gospel. The gospel that we have today is a direct product of God working with the Jews in order to reveal his character in terms of covenants and promises and prophecies, which are ultimately expressed in the coming of Jesus for the salvation of the world. As John said when Jesus walked in, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the Gentiles? No, the world. The Jews? No, the world. This is this Lamb. This is the blood sacrifice, the atoning substitutionary sacrifice that will take away the sin, not of just the Jews, but of the entire world. Paul then speaks of the failure of Israel to fully enter into all these things, saying that the word of God has not failed. It is not the promises. It is not the adoption. It is not the covenants. It is not the giving of the law or the temple service or the promises that has failed. Rather, it is the failure of those to whom it has been revealed to fully enter into it. The failure of Adonai's revelation to the Jews is not a failure of the revelation, it's a failure of the people who are trying to keep the revelation. And those of you who live under the grace of Jesus, answer me this question. If you had to live a legalistic life to gain merit before Adonai, if you had to live a legalistic life, would you be any more successful than they? No, of course not. We are the same. When Peter addresses the crowd, he said, you crucified this Jesus. Yes, what is the extrapolation to that? We crucified this Jesus through our rebellion. Verse 27, again, continuing from Romans chapter 9. Isaiah cries out concerning, this is right, 27. Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel may be like the sand of the sea, only the remnant will be saved. Meaning that Adonai God will not completely abandon his people. What did Adonai God tell Elijah? That I have kept 7,000 in Israel that have not bowed to the Baal. He will preserve his own. but rather Israel stumbled. They stumbled over their own adherence to the law of keeping the law uncorruptly and holy. Rather, they stumbled over the law, and they also stumbled over the testimony of Yeshua, as it says in verse 33. As it is written, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling, a rock of offense. Those who believe in him will not be put to shame. Now, many teachers would emphasize a spiritual Israel, which is those who are grafted into the real Israel, the believers in Jesus, and that perhaps this might discount the nation and the people of Israel. But Paul refers to Israel from here on through Romans 11, referring to the actual historical people of Israel and not a new defined spiritual Israel. In Romans 11, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? Far from it, or by no means, it'll say in some of your translations. For I too am an Israelite, descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people, whom he foreknew. Or don't you know what the scripture says? And it talks about this scripture from Elijah, how he pleads. And Adonai says that I have kept for myself 7,000 men. It is by grace, but you have to see in the text that it is a remnant by grace. This remnant that is being referred to here is no less in the grace of the sacrifice of Jesus than you are as a Gentile in the grace of the sacrifice of Jesus. They did not, and then it says this in Romans 11, verse 11, I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? They did not stumble so as to fall. In other words, they may have stumbled over Jesus. Look at this Jesus. They may have stumbled over him, but they didn't entirely lose everything. They still have the promises that God wants to fulfill, and he will fulfill them by virtue of his maintaining a remnant. What is this stumbling over Jesus? If you look at Jesus, there are four kind of main miracles to the life of Jesus, the Jesus here on the earth. The four great miracles. These things are necessary and required. If you understand them, then you understand why they would be required. But you have to understand also that these miracles would have been inexplicable. Let's take the first one. The first one is that Jesus was born of a woman as an infant. Nobody would have expected that the Creator God of the universe would send a Messiah, a Savior, born of a woman as an infant. What's the first thing you do with an infant? You got to feed them. That's kind of one of your first major tasks. They are so helpless, they can't last any length of time until you feed them. And then so it goes, and you feed them like clockwork for the first hours and days and months and time. This is what Jesus came as. That ought to be inexplicable. Sometimes we lose the sense of wonder. We lose a sense of startling. We lose a sense of surprise, if you will, because we're so inculcated with the truth of what we know. Yes, Jesus came as an infant. Nobody's going to deny that. Everybody's got that one, right? But wait, that ought to surprise us. Wait, what are you talking about? He came as an infant? How is that, and why is that? He came as an infant. He wouldn't come as an infant as an option. It wasn't an optional thing. Therefore, it must have been required. Let's look on. The next big miracle of the coming of Jesus is he came not just as the Son of Man, as we expected, but he also came as the Son of Adonai Elohim, God. He's the Son of God. We weren't expecting that. We were expecting a Mashiach, and in Jewish tradition, a Mashiach could be like a David or a Solomon or a Joseph. It could be somebody who's just very, very helpful to our lives. He saves us. Joseph was a Mashiach. He was a Messiah. Didn't necessarily need to be the Son of God, right? Third, Jesus was crucified. We might have expected some sort of sense of substitutionary sacrifice because we got that through the entire Bible, right? And in the temple service, we talk about the lambs, we sacrifice the lambs, we get the blood sacrifice for atonement and sins. But wait, what is this crucifixion? If anything, you might expect that Jesus had to go to the temple, go to the altar, and maybe he would make a blood sacrifice there, kind of like a circumcision, and there'd be some blood flowing. Maybe he gives up his life, I don't know. But the crucifixion, being lifted up on a tree, Jesus doesn't volunteer for that as an option. This isn't the luxury package. It was required. It was necessary. And the fourth thing, that is these four great miracles of the life of Jesus, he rose from the dead. Now, in my brain, I think, okay, Creator God of the universe somehow died. That can't be the end of the story. He's got to come back. That doesn't make sense to me. But look at the narrative that we have in the lives of the disciples. They are blown away by his death. They don't know what to do with him. In fact, even after it seems he's alive and he's somewhere, the woman at the tomb is saying, they've taken him and I don't know where you put him, and she's distraught. She's so distraught, she turns around speaking to Jesus and doesn't recognize him because all she sees is her grief because she doesn't know where they've placed my Lord. And when she sees that it's him, she throws herself down and grabs his feet and won't let go. These 4 miracles are stumbling stones to Israel. And we live 2,000 years in the future where we are inculcated almost to a point of propaganda with our understanding of these sort of principles, and we perhaps have lost some of the wonder and the surprise. And we've probably lost some of the stumbling stone. Now the biggest stumbling stone, I think, to the gospel is you're a sinful person. No, I'm not sinful. I'm a good person. I'm a decent person. I never killed anybody. Everybody thinks that they're, or another one is humanism, right? We're all like gods. People are going to perfect their world. That's our modern stumbling stone. We have to understand that the stumbling stones of the gospel for the Jews are these things. And Paul writes, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? Far from it. But by their wrongdoing, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now it says this, verse 12. This is Romans chapter 11, verse 12. If their wrongdoing proves to be riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? In other words, all the Gentiles of the earth have gained because of the Jews stumbling over these truths of God. How much more when Israel comes into the fullness of these things, how much more the world will be blessed. And look how Paul says it in the next line. If their rejection proves to be the reconciliation of the world, if the Jews' rejection of Yeshua, Jesus, is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be? When the Jews accept him, what will their acceptance be? It will be life from the dead. And this is verse 15 of Romans 11. The blessings of Israel to the world. What are the blessings of Israel? It's the knowledge, it's the understanding of salvation. It's the very essence of who God is. It's the character that is woven into ourselves. And finally this, you who have heard and know of Israel's rejection of Jesus, for those of you who have rejected Jesus, those of you who have this Jesus, this King of glory at arm's length, I would say, open the doors of your heart that you may see this King of glory come in. He is the one who has earned your love and your honor, because it was by his love for you and his love for the Father that he came to save you from your sins. As the disciples said to the people on Pentecost, you crucified this Jesus. And so I can claim the same thing. You all crucified this Jesus. What is my basis for claiming that? Because I can say, with all truth and honesty, I crucified this Jesus. But it was his love for me and his love for the Father. So this is what it says. Open wide, you gates, and let the King of glory come in and take his place. There's an invitation here for you to reconcile yourself before Adonai God. As we approach what many feel are the last days, Israel, and then specifically Jerusalem, will be the focus of the earth. We're already seeing this. Israel is called the apple of his eye in Deuteronomy 32 and Zechariah 2, how he longed to be a husband to Israel, how he took her back as an adulterous nation, how he took her back to himself. If Adonai God could reject Israel, why wouldn't he reject you in your times of unfaithfulness? By no means. Rather, Adonai God will not reject you, and neither will he reject Israel. But he will bring them to salvation, that they may be a praise in the earth. Jesus is returning to take up a throne in Jerusalem. You may have theological beliefs on this, but if you look at the simple and direct understanding of the text, somehow, somewhere, sometime, Jesus is coming back to rule and to reign. He's not coming back to New York or Geneva or Branson, Missouri. He's coming back to Jerusalem. This is why Jerusalem is called the stone of stumbling in all the earth, why the nations rage. But the rage of nations is like waves crashing on rock. They will destroy themselves like Pharaoh in attempt to destroy Israel, the people of God, and even to destroy Jesus himself. This is the narrative that is playing out before our eyes in our very time. Don't miss this opportunity to put yourself in a place of accepting the blessings that have been given to you. Don't miss the opportunity to reconcile yourself to God. That's what this is all about. It's like being reconciled to a long-lost father. And he offers that. He's done all the work. All you have to do is just connect with him.